when you trust the path you go, things come. Like universe, like, oh, finally you trust me. Okay, here's like what you need, right? But it's predicated on that trust, you know? It's like, again, that analogy. It's like being in a partnership but not trusting your partner, right? So every day you're checking their phones, you know? Every day you're like, when do you go out? You know, who are you with? Were you really with your friends? You know, it's like then that's not a real relationship, right? It's not a partnership. I truly believe it's the same thing when we are in partnership with the universe.
Ask you about your big three. That wasn't on my list, but might as well.
Might as well. So I'm a Pisces sun, a Sagittarius moon, and a Cancer rising.
Oh, I'm a Pisces sun too.
Oh, what degree?
It's in the 19th. Yeah, 19th.
19. Okay, cool. My Venus is at 24. So I think we have a bit of synastry there. Yeah.
Oh, great.
But my sun is 13. So I guess it's technically within orb still. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I guess depends what word you use. Oh, I love that. Great. Well, yeah, I guess like just diving right in and starting from the beginning of what did you imagine you'd become when you were growing up, and how close or far is that from where you're now?
You know, I don't think I had particular ambitions growing up. I'm sure, like, you know, in general, you be, oh, I want to be a scientist, I want to be a ballerina, whatever. But probably the one thing that had remained consistent is that since I was young, I loved to write. And now, you know, to some extent, I'm a writer. So I think that is definitely like a dream come true, right? And writing on my own terms, right? So like not writing for someone else's publication or like, you know, doing journalism or using that skill for something else. Like I think being able to use that skill like to serve my passions is something that, yeah, I don't think my younger self could have even imagined doing that. But the fact that I am doing that, you know, thanks to Substack, which is how we met, I think that's so incredible. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And was that kind of your first passion of writing, or did you start writing after you started doing astrology? I guess, yeah, like fill me in on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've loved writing since I was like 7. So my mom gave me my first journal, like diary, I guess, at that time when I was like 5, and she would make me like learn how to write. So for her, it was mainly about like grammar. My mom didn't grow up knowing English, so for her, it was so important because at that time in Malaysia was under British colonial rule, so we had to, you know, basically like she had to learn English, and she was like, oh, I don't want my children to go through the struggle that she went through, having to learn it, you know, from scratch. So when we were young, you know, 5 years old, she was like, okay, here's your diary, like write about your day, right? But then she would like go through my spelling. She'd be like, oh, you spelled sausage wrong, you spelled watch wrong, you know, like those like little tricky words. Yeah. So it started out that way for her, but then I think what she didn't anticipate is how much I would enjoy writing about my life and my, you know, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, like the things that I was going through, which is actually still the same things I'm writing about now. So it's like, yeah. I think she didn't realize that she would have planted that seed back then.
I know, I was gonna say she told you to write about your day, and look where you are, writing
Exactly.
about your day, pretty much.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. And I mean, I've read a little bit, obviously, about kind of your background from your Substack, and I know that astrology wasn't anything that, you know, you thought of kind of as a career path. But I guess like kind of fill me in, you know, like what first drew you to astrology, or like how did it emerge? Was it kind of like in the in between, or yeah, like how the heck are you an astrologer now?
Honestly, that's like the craziest thing about it. At this point in my journey, I really see astrology as a tool to support people in their, you know, in their journeys, right? Similar, I guess, to what you do as well as a coach, right? I think I'm slowly transitioning to more of like that way of relating to astrology. So I was never super like, oh my God, like astrology is like the be all end all. And I think that's still true, right? It's not like everything. to me. So even back then, my first exposure probably was when I was like 13, 14 in Malaysia, the newspapers, and when you flip to the section, like the Sunday section or whatever, you would see horoscopes, right? Now as astrologers, you know that you don't read for your sun sign for horoscopes. But back then, you don't know anything. So I was like, oh, what's my zodiac for the week, right? Like, oh, okay. And then my Aquarius Mercury would have this very kind of like skeptical, critical, like, okay, let's see if it's true. So like, that social scientist way of going about it, like, all right, this is what the newspapers say. Let's see if it actually plays out that way. Obviously, like, probably like 8 times out of 10, it doesn't, right? Because it doesn't work that way for the sun sign. But I would do that. I would look up mine. I would look up my crushes, right? My Sagittarius crush. I'll be like, oh, okay, like this is what the stars have in store for us. So I think that was probably my first exposure to astrology. But in terms of like actually studying it, I think I was exposed to a witchy kid, Ocean Pleasant. We go way back. We were both in the startup world at one point. We had never met, but our lives were like running in parallel. And then one day, I think I saw her post about Deborah Silverman, who runs a school, an online astrology school. And at the time, I was already, I was an IG Astro girly, right? I was following all the, Cosmic Latte, whatever. Like I was like reading about it, wanting to know more about it, like piecing together information about my own chart and my own astrology, not exactly knowing how it all fits together. But when I saw her post about Deborah in the school, and I was like, okay, I'm quite intrigued, right? I didn't know there are schools out there that teach astrology, through a structured way. Of course, now as an astrologer, I know that, okay, this is a whole ass industry, but at times like that was my entryway. So this was like 2021, 2022. That's why I enrolled in 2022, thanks to Ocean. And it's just been that incredible journey since. Like I'm an astrologer for 2 years now. So yeah.
Wow, that's cool. And I feel like, yeah, the horoscopes are totally the gateway drug for everybody.
Yeah,
And then once it
everybody.
piques your interest,
Exactly.
yeah, you get
Exactly.
going. So, like for you, was that more so, like, oh, I'm, interested in astrology. I would like to know more. Like, were you using that more as a tool to get to know yourself more, or like what aspects, I guess, were interesting to you about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think at that time, the year that I got really into astrology, like 2021, 2022, I was going through a big transition in my career. So long story short, for basically about 7 years, I was an entrepreneur. I was running my own business. I have never really wanted to, again, as you can probably tell, march to the beat of anyone else's drum. So basically, I dropped out at 21 years old. And then since then, I was building this business, right? And at the time, knowing nothing, literally learning from the ground up, it was my baby. It was my everything. I gave my all to this company. And it was interesting because the dynamics of the team were also really interesting because I was working with my partner, my best friend, and my sister. So you can see how complicated that whole thing could be, right? So long story short, in 2022, I had huge relationship fallouts with my best friend and my sister, and they both left the company. So it was left with just me and my partner. And at that time, I remember the first thought I had was, oh my God, why can't I leave too? Which is obviously not something a founder should ever be thinking, right? Especially in a crisis. So that was a wake-up call for me because I was like, it was my all. I could not even fathom not doing this because this was the only, I literally thought I would only have this one business and this one career for the rest of my life, right? Because I gave up everything to do this. So I was like, oh, that's really weird. So astrology came in to give me, I guess, context on why certain things were unfolding the way they are. So it gave me a new lens of understanding myself, transits, right? Like why this was even playing out. I found out, at that time, I thought it was Mercury retrograde, which is what everyone thinks every problem is. But at that time, I realized, it was the eclipses, that was causing this thing between me and my sister, for example. So all of those things gave me so much more context, and I was like, okay, I finally understand how the cycles of time work. So I think astrology is, for me, especially beyond the psychological aspect, I really find like knowing the divine timing of things and how the cycles of time work. I find it to be very comforting, not to predict or control, but to give context, right? Which is why, even now in my Substack, I try to write about it through that lens, right? Like, this is what's happening, and this is how I think it ties into the bigger picture. Like, I always try to do that because I guess that's what helped me at that time to go through it. It's not bypassing, like I didn't take away from my experience, but it really helped put it all into context. That's why I keep using that word, context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that's super fascinating. So for you, it was the transits. For me, it was more of like the natal chart and understanding myself. But I can totally see how, the way that you write about it is through that lens of almost like probably, and this is a total assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably as you were like going through that process with your company and having the falling out, it probably like, did it feel like, it was on the right path for things to happen, but it just like didn't make sense on paper?
Yes. I just got chills. I get chills when someone speaks truth. So like, it's great when I'm in readings and then like the client says something, I'm like, oh yes, that's right. 100%. 100% what you said. Like, I really think it was like, as I was going through that process, like realizing, like, I guess I always believe in the right timing and the right, like everything is just on its path, right? And I know in my natal chart, I have a tendency to kind of want to reverse decisions, like something's going a certain way, and I'm like, oh, is that really right? So I'll try to like, reverse and like pull the reins a bit, which doesn't make sense. But like going into astrology was the smoothest journey of my entire life. Like everything just flowed. Like it's like when I found about the school, it's like, okay, immediately, I signed up, like all the conditions were in place. I was leaving my company, I was transitioning out of it. So I had time, I had space, I had money that I had made from the company to basically, fund my studies. So it was like, it was all falling into place. Like everything just made it so that my journey into this realm was accelerated. So that really gave me the feeling like, okay, none of this makes sense. Why am I blowing up my career of 7 years to go into this brand new thing? But it was just flowing. It was just flowing. So definitely, like you said, like that gave me a new lens of kind of appreciating, like, okay, I guess this is what it means to just surrender and trust, right? Like just to go with that, which for me, humans, we have that critical mind. I feel like astrology does help to soothe that a little bit, right? Because when you see that bigger context, it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is why things are flowing the way they are, right? It doesn't explain everything, but it explains a little, just enough to give you that, okay, let's keep going. It's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have two questions coming up as you're speaking. Making sure I don't forget the second one.
Okay.
But the way that you describe it, so you said something like, I believe, we all have a path and everything kind of happens in, the right timing. How do you distinguish that versus like, free will, not free will? You know how people are like confused about that with astrology?
Yeah. Okay, you wanna say the second question, or you want me to answer that first?
Okay, so the second one I'll just share so we don't forget in case I forget. I was curious whether, like, when you left the company and you decided to, kind of like follow the path, did you know that, you were on the path of becoming a consulting astrologer or not?
Okay.
So yeah, but back to free will.
I'll quickly answer the second one.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, yeah.
Because the thing that tipped me over, so I'll share a really interesting synchronicity. So you remember I mentioned Ocean, Pleasant, right?
Yeah.
So our paths, like I knew of her because we were both basically in this like crazy scholarship from Peter Thiel in like 20, like when like before 20, it's called like 20 under 20, like certain like 20-year-olds or something like that would be selected, blah, blah, blah. She was one of the ones who was selected. I was just a semi-finalist. So I knew of her. I followed her journey. We were both like mutuals for many years, but we had never talked. When I found about this school through following her Instagram or whatever, right? They had this interest call that you could sign up and basically like this, right? You could talk to someone. I got Ocean. Out of all the people in the company, I was matched with her. No context, nothing. It was just the algorithm. And I think I re-signed up a few times and I kept getting Ocean. So I was like, this is insane.
Wow.
Yeah, so things like that, like synchronicities like that. So I was like, okay, there's something really weird here. So the crazy thing is that I had already signed up for the school, but I only signed up for level 1. I didn't want to go all the way in. On the call with her, I had told her, okay, I had only just signed up for level 1. And she was the one that told me, Gwen, if you commit to, level 1 and level 2, by the end of this year, December 2022, you will be a professional consulting astrologer getting paid. That's what she told me. And that moment was the tipping point where, to answer your second question, I knew if I trusted the path and I committed more, I guess in that sense, right? Like I committed to not just one level, but the second level as well, I would be able to see things through and end up at the point where I could be a consulting astrologer. So I knew that that was a path because she set it out for me. She showed me what was possible. And because I had followed her journey and seeing how successful she was, I was like, oh, it is possible. Like, people are paying her that amount or whatever, right? So I was like, okay. So that's what, I think that answers the second question. But in terms of the first question of like free will, I think that's the weird thing. Like, so you believe in like multiverse or, like all those like things, right? Where one decision will influence all the other like possibilities of your life or whatever. I believe that in the sense that I truly believe if your soul is calling you toward a certain thing, everything in your life will either be shaped around that or you will naturally orient it around that. I don't know if that makes sense. So it's like, for example, you know what I mean? Like the simplest example, do I get in a relationship or not? Like literally the difference is so clear, right? Single life, partner life. Like the lives are so different, right? But you need to choose. So can you imagine if you were someone that was like, oh, I really like this guy, things are working out great, but I'm not sure if I should commit to him, right? So then you're always either walking the middle road, situationship or whatever, but you're not committing, right? So the life can't fully blossom or like manifest oriented around that commitment, that decision. So I think it's not about free will. The free will comes in that decision, right? The universe will give you like a crap ton of signs. It'll be like, okay, this is it. Like you can go here if you want, But if you're like, maybe, and then you stay on your path, because we are on our path. That's the thing, right? I think someone said this to me, I can't remember who. Even not deciding is still a decision. You are already on the path. You're there. It's like if you're like, even if you're not, let's say, single or partner, even if you're still waffling, you're still on a path, right? It's just that I guess that path is, it's not fully, you don't give that opportunity for any of the options to fully flourish because you're not going all the way in, right? So yeah, I truly believe perhaps what astrology does is that because it gives us that context, it gives you the courage to commit to a path. Yeah, actually, now that I'm talking to you, yeah. I know it sounds so weird, but like, that I recently separated from my partner of 8 years, right? And knowing the context of astrology, like right now, the North Node, literally in Aries of independence versus the South Node of Libra in codependency, which was my whole issue with this partner. We love each other so much, but that is and probably always will be our main issue, right? Me choosing this path is contextualized by the astrology. Of course, I'm not saying, oh, Aries, everyone should break up. Then that takes away the free will, right? But it gives me a new lens of understanding why I have these impulses in the first place. Because from the moment it went into Aries, I was really thinking of breaking up. The moment I still remember it was like the full moon in Aries or something like that. So it's crazy. I was like, this makes no sense. Like, why am I thinking about this after so many years of happily being together? But then the thing just kept coming back again and again and again and again and again. And until now, the moment I made it, it was the most painful decision I had ever made. But I am at peace because I am not thinking about the decision anymore. Right? I'm not in that middle road or middle path. Right? I've committed. So I was like, wow, this is insane. Like, I don't understand. I don't understand how this works, but I guess I'm not meant to, right? All I meant to do is just walk it and trust. So that's what I'm doing.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was recently listening to a podcast and it was like it had this concept of like green flag fear versus red flag fear.
I like that.
And so like yeah, like a green flag is when your mind is scared for something, but like your soul or like
Mm,
your inner voice is like saying, "Oh, like it's okay to feel that." Versus like
absolutely.
red flag, your mind is like, "Oh, this is a great decision," but your soul is like, "Do not go there." And this is kind of,
So
the
true.
same concept. Yeah,
Wow, I
I
love
love
that.
that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think,
Beautiful.
because we are so disconnected from our intuition. So, however you define intuition, guidance, spirit, soul, intuition, however you define it, we are so disconnected from it. We always think the logical decision, the smart decision is the right decision, which is what you meant by the red flag fear. But one thing I
Yeah.
realized is that we don't realize the cost of the red flag fear, because especially in Asian community, I'm sure you probably resonate as well to some level. Basically, as someone who grew up in a minority family, right, in the context of wherever you are, there will always
Hmm.
be this emphasis on security, right? So it's like your family will
Mm.
tell you this is the right way to do things. You need to take care of your future first. Like my poor traditional dad, he's still messaging me, why did you separate from your partner? You're 30, you'll never get a boyfriend. Can you please go back to him? Like, I get where it's coming from, that security, like that emphasis on safety and security, but that's a red flag fear, because
Hmm.
what we don't realize, there's a true cost to not listening to your intuition. And we don't realize that because we're so used to just following what everyone else is doing or what people tell us to do. We don't realize that there is a cost, because people just think, oh yeah, even there, if there is a cost, it's a sacrifice, right? So that I can, be safe, I can
Yeah.
provide for my family. All very true. I'm not saying that, disregard that. But I think what people really underestimate is how much there's that symbiotic relationship almost with universe and energy and whatever you want to call it, that when you trust the path you go, things come. Like universe, like, oh, finally you trust me. Okay, here's like what you need, right? But
Hmm.
it's predicated on that trust, you know? It's like, again, that analogy. It's like being in a partnership but not trusting your partner, right? So every day you're checking their phone, every day you're like, when do you go out? Who are you with? Were you really with your friends? It's like then that's not a real relationship, right? It's not a partnership. I truly believe it's the same thing when we are in partnership with the universe, right? Which is actually what it is when you trust and you're on a spiritual path. Like, I always believe, wow, like, spiritual business, right? Like, when you are in a energy-led business, you need to
Hmm.
trust that partnership. If you don't have that trust in the relationship, it's just not going to flow, right? And you're always gonna have friction, like, oh, oh no, my bank account is going low. What do I do? Right? And then you go into the red flag fear, right? You're like, okay, I'm gonna
Hmm.
use my brain to try to figure this out. When in reality, it was a heart-led decision anyway. So why are you using your brain?
Oh my gosh, I love that you're going into this.
I
Yes.
know, it's crazy. I
Um,
can't believe I'm here as well. Thank you for holding this container to go here, because I think it's so powerful. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it would be like hypercritical of
Yeah.
us to, not do that. And like at the same time, it's like okay to acknowledge that we're humans too
Yes.
in this profession.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the dichotomy. That's so crazy.
Oh
That's a
my
crazy
goodness.
about this.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like tell me more, I guess, that about that balance of like what does it look like for you? And maybe even like going back to as you were starting out, like
Okay. Yeah.
was it all clear for you because you like saw your transits, you saw your chart, or what
Mhm.
did that look like?
I think it was clear because energetically, the flow for me, I'm a very all in kind of gal, right? When I'm into something, I'm like, shoot, like, I can't just put one foot in, right? So I knew for me, because my flow, so even when I was like, again, walking the middle road between astrology and my previous company, I would spend all my time researching transits, reading about obviously all the different placements and things like that, Googling, right? Instead of doing my actual work. And then when I would actually have to go into like client meetings or whatever, I would just feel so heavy. So I guess my answer would be trust your energy. Like, we're so disconnected from our body and our intuition. We don't realize how clear these signals are, right? Back then I was like, oh my God, I can't believe. I need to go into this meeting. And then I would, because it's my company, I would self-sabotage so many different things to try to get out of it when in reality, I just didn't want to be there, right? So I'll be like, do we really need this meeting? Let's have like a 4-hour meeting to decide if we need this meeting. You know, like stupid things, you know what I mean? So again, I didn't realize, because red flag fear, right? I was operating out of that scarcity. But when I went into astrology, I guess at that time, my heart was so open, and I was really in a great relationship with universe, like you said, right? So it's like that symbiotic partnership was so powerful that I was just in full trust every day. I was showing up with my heart wide open. I was so happy. I was genuinely just so happy to be able to talk about astrology with anyone, even if I had like 0 followers on Instagram at that time, which I did, right? So I would just be like, la, 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 oh, this is what's happening. Venus just entered Capricorn, blah, blah, blah. You know, I was just so excited to talk about it. My relationship with it now, 2 years on, obviously has changed. But at that time, I just remembered, like, that is what lights me up. So I guess I just trusted that, and everything else just fell into place, because I knew what was that one thing that I was very anchored on, which at that time was talking about astrology. It's very specific. I wasn't so much writing about it or doing, you know, I mean, I was doing all those things. I was writing about it. I was doing readings and all. But the thing I was most excited about was talking about it, right? So I just really wanted to be a channel on Instagram or whatever, like to finally just like start talking about it. So I think I really anchored on that. And that is what basically tided me through like, probably the first year of my business. Like I was just like, wow, like I don't really care about money or anything. Like I just want to focus on this one thing, because that is the thing that, you know, I felt most excited to do. And then, yeah, so I think I can go on and on. But I think that answers the question, right? Like of.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Have you like, is it just something that comes naturally to you? Like you're always the person to follow the energy, or was it like completely new?
I guess it was like I had lived my life with brakes on the entire time. And the moment I got into astrology, it's like the brakes came off, because I allowed myself to take the brakes off, and then I could fly. Like just things just went so smoothly. I just got so much love. It was like a flywheel, right? Obviously, at that time, the more I shared, the more people I magnetized to me, and the more, I guess, like compliments or like basically like cheerleading I got, which is like people telling me, "Oh, you're on the right track. Keep going," you know. And I was like, okay, so it just kept going. It was like a flywheel, right? But because I trusted first, like I put myself out there first, you know. But to answer your question on a practical term, even before I started to make videos for astrology, for example, I was already experimenting with putting myself out there through like creative poetry and reels and little things like that on my personal page. So it wasn't a head first dive, like, oh, from scratch, let's just do it. Again, unconsciously, see, like I said, you follow the crumbs, right? Unconsciously, for I think like a few months in 2022, I did this 100-day creativity challenge, where for 100 days, yeah, I can't believe it. Like for 100 days, I consistently created one thing. So one thing that didn't exist. It could be as simple as a doodle. It could be as comprehensive as a reel, right? And at that time, I was so shit, you know, I was like, oh, how do I edit this, right? But it was like, yeah, like that was, I did this 100-day challenge. I was so proud of myself when I finished, because I was like, wow, I can't believe I saw something through for 100 days. So it was like little things like that that was already setting me up for the big thing. Again, of course, I didn't know that that would be the big thing, right? But yeah, so it's like trusting the energy again, because at the time when I was doing, let's say, the 100-day, I was just like, yay, it's something fun. So it's just, again, the energy, like giving myself permission, and then slowly giving yourself more and more permission to do, like, to follow the energy even more, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's actually like a lot of my work as a coach. You're like the, you know, exhibit A or the live example of like, first, you know, realign with what's important to you, kind of like follow that energy, and then do the little tiny things of like, what does it mean to be that person? And so you were just
Literally.
kind of showing up as that.
Which is like, and then something so concrete like 100 days, and then something so small, one small thing every day. I mean, of course, when you say it sounds easy, but when you actually do it, you know, by day 7, you're like, what the hell? I don't want to do this anymore. But it's like, yeah, absolutely what you said. Yeah. But So if like you ask me what was that value that was orienting myself around, it was creativity. And that can be tied back to my natal chart, right? I have a 5th house stellium that had not been activated at that point, because all my creative energy was going into the shadow version of my company, right? Of course, I was using my creativity, but I was using it out of fear, out of scarcity, very capitalistic, like, okay, I need to make this work because I need to feed my partner, my sister, my best friend. If I don't earn money, all of us starve. That was such a scary place to be in, because I was literally providing for all the people I loved, right? So I was like, like, why would I put myself in that situation? I'm never going to do that again. But it's like, but so it was creativity that was in my natal chart that sparked this. But it was eventually that after knowing my natal promise, and like you said, deciding on the value, taking the small steps to it every day to reaffirm that identity, which is why now, so many years later, I can, conclusively say I'm a creative person, right? But I have never been able to own that identity, even as, as recent as like 2019. Yeah, I was still resistant, because, just like an artist that doesn't make art, right? It's like, I was like, oh, I can't own this identity because I'm not using this part of me. So I think that's how it all plays together, right? Like knowing your natal chart, knowing your natal promise to explain, why do I feel like I need to put myself out there? Why do I feel like I need to share my art with the world? I never understood that impulse, but there was that disconnect in myself all these years, all the way until that 100-day challenge, when I finally owned it's okay to be cringe. It's okay to, like make shitty art and put it on the internet. It was so bad. Like, when I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, it was so terrible. But that's the best part. It's like, wow, I get to see my progress. I'm sure even now when I look back at the stuff I think now, like, 2 years later, I'm going to say the same thing. So I'm like, wow, that's the beautiful thing about this. Yeah.
I love this. I was talking to Rick Levine. He's an astrologer. I don't know if you're aware of him. And he was, he borrowed it from Carl Jung, but the way that he explains, it's like the planets in our chart that we don't express are showing up as projections. And so that was kind of, if you're not expressing your 5th house stellium, and you're not, I guess it's like the same with transits too. Like, first, if you're not expressing something that's in your chart, then you're making the wrong decision, not following your path during a transit.
Right.
Yeah.
Just got mind blown.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, I have a concept floating in my brain. My Mercury's in Pisces retrograde, so it's not like coming out with the words, but it's just, it's kind of like making me, like giving me the visuals of that experience of like the value of astrology, the value of knowing your natal chart, understanding the transits and timing, and then like that's where free will shows up. Like, do I want to express this, or do I want to ignore it and feel like shit and frustrated because it's like not coming out?
Wow.
Right?
100%. Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
So when did you first decide to see clients, and like how did that whole thing, start? And like, were you nervous? Were you like self-doubting whether you're ready? Because I feel like a lot of people, like whether they're in astrology or any sort of healing modality, are, it's a big point.
Big thing. Yeah. And I think, again, I'm very lucky because of 2 things. Number one, the entire thing that I've been doing for the 7 years leading up to it was client facing. You know what I mean? Obviously not in this therapeutic context of like one-on-one holding space, but it was an empathy training company. So literally I was already skilled in holding space for a group. So one-on-one became so much easier because, I was already used to holding a larger energetic space. So definitely I'm very lucky to have had that background to give me the confidence. Another thing I'll say though is that the school I was in, Deborah Silverman School, her whole thing is around the context of, I'm going to give you enough knowledge and I'm going to give you a script. Like, she literally came up with a script from her 40 years of experience of doing readings. And she's like, I'm going to train you in this script because I want you to get out there and start doing reading, because that's the only way you're going to learn. So it was very suitable for me as a very hands-on kind of person. We definitely learned a lot in the school, theoretically, but it had to come together in the reading, right? So literally to graduate from level 2, you had to give a reading that they would organize for a stranger using the script. So that's how you graduate. It's like, it's so practical. Yeah. So
Super
that
cool.
forced us to, be in the habit of like, okay, I need to see clients. I need to, like arrange the time with them. So we had to do the whole process, right? We had to arrange the time with them. We had to prepare the thing. We had to do the reading, and then we had to send them the follow-up. So they gave us the full experience of what it would be like to be in consultation. So I'm really grateful for that, because I think if not for that, I wouldn't have had the courage as well to just literally jump, feet first into that. And again, thanks to Ocean as well, who told me, you need to stay on the horse, right? You can't, like, now you graduate from level 2. I was like, oh, I don't think readings are for me. And then she's like, just set a goal and work toward that goal, and make sure you keep your skills fresh. So I'm just genuinely so lucky. I had people around me, again, in the form of the universe, right? Like telling me, keep going, don't stop now. Because like I said, I have a tendency to stop, right? And second guess. So she told me to set a goal. I set a goal for 100 readings, and I never looked back. I was just so laser focused. I was like, okay, I need to do my first 100 readings. Okay. And then I just kept going. And then it became like 100 readings in a year. Okay, let me try. In the end, I didn't succeed in doing it within 1 calendar year. But I think just the motivation of having that very clear goal to keep me going. Like, I wasn't thinking about pricing. I wasn't thinking about, my only goal was I want to make sure I do 100 professional readings. So not like 5 at a house party, these were 100 like recorded notes, everything. Like I could submit them for certification, like level of readings. So that was my only goal. And that kept me going for like a year and a half-ish. Yeah, so I was like, wow, I'm so grateful to that, because every time I felt demotivated, I just remembered this goal, which is like, oh, what number am I at? Oh, I'm at 58. Oh, I'm halfway there. Okay, let's go. Yeah.
Great. I love what you said, or I guess what Deborah said, is like the only way to learn is to actually do readings. And specifically in astrology, that is, the most key point. Like, you can go to school for 10 years and listen to lectures, but you're never going to learn until you start talking to people about their charts. And I feel like that also applies to other modalities of like, we don't need to be, the only difference between like an amateur and a professional is like a professional just charges money, and it doesn't have to be like $1,000 for a reading. It can be $10 and you're considered a professional.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so great.
That's so true. People get hung up on the pricing, right? I definitely undercharged for like, I don't know, the first, I don't know how many readings, right? And I remember being so excited because of the currency exchange. So I was like, oh, even though it's so little, like for me, it felt like a lot. And at the time, even though I was marketing to like American clients, because I'm an American school, right? Even though I was getting international clients, I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm so excited because my readings are getting booked out. They're getting sold out like months in advance without realizing I was completely undercharging. So that's why they were getting sold out. And the moment I increased my price to something more standard, and then obviously it stopped selling out, right? So I was like, oh no, I'm doing something wrong. But, of course, now I realize, I'm just, I'm readjusting to the market rate, right? But I want to tell people who are on the fence, oh, how much do I charge? Never charge beyond what you are energetically comfortable with. Again, intuition, right? If I had listened to my mentors, who are all Americans, for them, it's like, oh, 100 is nothing, 100 is standard. If I charge 100 USD when I first started, I wouldn't sell a single reading. Do you know why? I didn't feel confident in myself. It's not about the value of the reading. I didn't feel confident to offer $100 reading on the get-go. So don't do that. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times we try to do what people tell us to do, or what we think is right. So we get stuck, right? Oh, I want to charge, let's say, just 50 because I'm just starting up. Oh no, but if I charge 50, my mentors are charging 100, 200. Oh, I'm spoiling the market. I'm not doing it right. I'm gonna, and then you don't do the reading. What?
Yeah, and it's like that energy of like, notice what happens to your energy if you overcharge, and then you're going to be like self-sabotaging yourself. Like, I don't want to take on any clients because they're going to find out I'm a fraud or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
But then at the same time, I wonder, like, what's your view on just like the discomfort because you like truly energetically don't feel ready for it versus you're
Mm.
just like unsure of yourself for XYZ matters, or even like women tend to undercharge than men or
Yeah.
whatever. Like,
Yeah.
what's the difference between
Oh.
that?
So to clarify the question, what's the difference between like the wrong path, you mean? Like I'm charging wrongly? Is that what you
So
mean? Or
so you
undercharging?
you said something like don't charge like in the beginning, or I guess like
Mm.
whenever, don't charge something that you're not comfortable
Mm.
to like deliver, I guess,
Mm.
versus like how do you know that you're just like not ready yet
Ah,
versus
okay, I get your
the
question.
yeah.
Yeah. Get to a number where you feel like I would pay myself for this,
Mm,
whatever that number is, right? So whatever level you are currently at, because in a way, no one will know your skill, your business, your offering as well as you do, right? So you need to be very intentional and almost neutral with yourself about it, right? You need to be very objective. Sorry, yeah, that's the right term, right? So honestly, it's like if you are the kind of person who wouldn't even spend $200 on a reading, why would you charge $200? Right?
mm,
Like why would you do that? Like you won't spend that on yourself, let alone anyone else. Why would you expect someone to do that to for your reading? you know?
mm-hmm,
So at that time, I mean, of course, practically speaking, I was charging, pay as you wish. I think for probably like the first 25 reading, but I gave a range. So it's not like
mm-hmm,
pay as you wish and then they give me $5, right? It's like pay as you wish within this range, right? So those who felt more generous, they would give me a certain amount. Those who felt, whatever. But then I noticed a pattern in the market that they were giving me around that range. So I was like, oh, that should be my first price, like
that's
the fixed price that
awesome.
I put. Because then when I started to say, okay, I'm doing pay as you wish, people usually give me this much, but most people I notice are tending to give me this much, let's say, right? So let's say 55 USD, right? You can give me between 35 and 55, but most people are paying me 55. So people be like, okay, and then they just give you 55, right? So the more people did that, the more I was like, oh, okay, 55. Here's a little bit of a stretch for me at that time. Because again, I was doing it basically for free, right? I was like, okay, yeah, I can go with that. So that moment was a big moment, right? Because I finally set the price. It's your
Mm-hmm,
energetic commitment to the client and to the price, right? To the universe to say like, okay, 55, right? So that's a big step. But before you even get to that step, how do you even know what you are comfortable with, what people are willing to pay you, all of that? If it's so unclear, just do pay as you wish and put a range, you know?
that's smart. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I had someone give me 5 USD and I was like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
For 1 hour reading, hello. Yeah, so
Oh
thank
my
God that
God.
didn't go through in the end. So I'm
Yeah.
very protected. I'm very protected. I was like, what the heck? What's wrong with this person? But in the end, they were like, oh, can I change the date? I'm like, okay, bye. I was like, yeah. So like certain experiences come. Okay, so if I had used that $5 experience to define me, to say like, oh, does that mean I'm not worthy? Does that mean that my
Mm,
services are only worth $5? How can she think that of me? And if I made it something personal about myself, right? I think that's the difference between knowing how to read the cues from the universe, right? Knowing how to take the lessons without necessarily internalizing any beliefs about yourself, right?
mm,
So now looking back, because I totally forgot about this story until now I'm sharing with you, right? That was a very formative experience for me in this journey as well. That's why I remember it, because it taught me that number one, I am very protected, because in the end, I didn't need to see this client after all. And number two, oh, that's why I need to put a range. So that experience taught me I need to put the range, right? Because prior to that,
mm.
everyone was giving me, like $45, $55. But she gave me $5. But I hadn't verbalized that there's a range that I was comfortable with. So I was like, oh, I need to articulate this. Thank you, person.
Mm,
Right. So
mhm.
instead of internalizing, oh, I'm only worth $5. Why would she think that? Right. It's like, oh, it's still a teaching moment. But I'm
Yeah.
not giving it, a certain meaning that would ultimately be detrimental to me and my self-perception. So yeah. So I feel like obviously in business, you will encounter situations like that are not so great. but it depends on how you want to learn from it, like what you take from it literally, right? It's not like, oh, okay, like, oh, don't make it mean something about yourself, but find the meaning, right? Find what it's supposed to teach you, but don't make it mean anything about yourself or your business. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. That's so brilliant.
Uh,
One thing that like keeps standing out about you, I think like, and it comes across obviously very well through your writing, but as you're sharing too, like building up your practice is just like how like not attached to perfection you are. And that is like, not to say that your writing is not perfect. It's just more about like you really just share your experience as you're going through with the transits, like before, maybe you made it into like a learning experience, or I don't know. So like
yeah.
how do you work with that? Or like how is that just something that you think like comes natural to you, like based on your natal chart? Or has there been like a path that, has taught you that perfection is not necessary?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think again with the whole spiritual business thing, I think perfectionism. So my Chiron's in Virgo, and I have a triple Virgo mom, right? Whose Sun and Pluto are conjunct my Chiron or something crazy like that. So I realized that, perfectionism is a defense mechanism that I had used my entire life up to basically this point. Even in my previous company, right? I was so focused on being perfect, presenting my image a certain way, right? Like wanting to be perceived as, let's say, this perfect leader, or like this, this person that is deserving of respect, deserving of fame and whatever, right? So it was very oriented around the ego, basically. I think what people don't realize is that perfectionism is a defense of the ego. That really is all it is. You can't sugarcoat it beyond that, because only ego wants perfection, because ego wants to preserve what is, right? So it's like, oh, I want to be perceived this way, so anything that is misaligned with that, I'm going to try to control it. That's what perfectionism is, right? When we follow that soul journey, and of course, like you said, we are humans and we are learning to do this. When we follow our soul journey, the soul in and of itself is imperfect, right? Because literally we came to earth school to learn those lessons that are messy, that are messed up, that are going to challenge us, make us cry, make us like wish we weren't here, basically, right? And it's like obviously, you are going to be imperfect. So I guess, and I think I'm very grateful for in my previous company as well, is that, again, because it's empathy training, the whole thing was about vulnerability, and how when you open up on your story, your journey, your experiences, you give other people permission to do the same. So that is a very core fundamental belief of mine, which obviously informed that company because I'm the founder, which I think I still bring into everything I do now. So even when I see my clients, I'm like, it's okay to be imperfect, right? That's like the whole thing is just me telling them, this is why you are the way you are, and that's okay, And then even in my writing, right, this is why I am the way I am, and that's okay, right? And one thing that consistently, floors me as a Sagittarius moon is how I can use my experiences, my emotional experiences, because Sag is experiential, right? And people get so much meaning out of just my experience without me needing to put some moral story or lesson, or like, this is what you should be taking away. Everyone takes something different away. And that's also something I learned from my previous company, right? Basically, we would do story circles where everyone shares their personal experiences and we would empathize with each other. Yeah. I even created a tool, the empathy box, which is cards to help you empathize with each other. So you validate, you inquire into people's experiences. It's amazing. But when you transcribe that to, let's say, the Substack experience, right? It's like me sharing my story in a similar way. Like, I'm just sharing. You get to take away what you want from it. Right? You get to take away. And I'm not going to tell you, therefore, the moral of this story is, right? Because that would be leading into the shadow of Sag, actually, which is dogma. I'm going to tell you what you should believe. That's a shadow. right? So that's why you see Sagittarius, like, when they're in their shadow, they are so dogmatic. They're so like, this is the right way. This is why I believe. This is like, like, yeah. And I used to be that way again, to some extent, right? But so really all this whole thing has just been a shedding, right? Unlearning, letting go. Okay, that doesn't serve me anymore. That doesn't serve me anymore. And then getting to a point where it's like, okay, like I'm just living my life. I'm just sharing my life. You can take what you want from it. And it still amazes me people pay me for this, but okay, you can take what you want from it, right? And yeah, that's it. And then, if you like what I do, you can come for a reading, and I can continue doing that to you one-on-one. And okay, great. It's like, yeah, that really is all it is to it. Yeah.
Wow. I am like so intrigued now about your company, and I hope one day that I'm sure you'll end up like doing something that's like a mishmash of astrology and empathy training. But yeah, how I just love what you said about like sharing stories and being able to empathize with that. And then I guess like what does that create for people like coming from like that background? What does it empower others to do in your view?
Wait, in the old company or
just like in general, like you share your story, you allow, I guess you give the opportunity for people to be empathetic toward your story, take something away for themselves, and like what else do you see like does that contribute to, or I guess like why should we be open and vulnerable and sharing our stories in your view?
It's honestly such a great question, and it makes me, because it's such a fundamental belief of mine. It's like, okay, why wouldn't you? It's like, why wouldn't you breathe, kind of thing. I think, honestly speaking, it helps you realize you're not alone on so many levels. You're not alone in how you're feeling. You're not alone in what you're experiencing. You're not alone in how you see the world. And I think as someone with the karma in my chart of always feeling misunderstood and alone, I grew up with a lot of shame around my childhood experiences. Basically, my parents are divorced and my dad is bankrupt. So the emotional and financial shame that I carried around with me, and on top of that, them saying, don't tell anyone because they are shameful, right? So I had to like, how do I navigate my life with this gigantic secret? Like people want to come over to my house. I'm like, no, like, so it's like all these things. It was such a relief to finally just be honest, which again is all a Sagittarius moon wants. We just want to be honest, right? And I think that was the turning point for me, because I was like, oh, somehow in overcoming my shame of being able to put these things out there, okay, it leads to deeper connection. I feel more connected with myself, with my story, with other people. Other people feel more connected with me, right? And we all get to just go through it together. I think we underestimate the power of going through things together. Yeah. And I think as a writer, what we want most of all is people to resonate with our stories. But what is that resonance actually, if not for just people to see us, right? But it starts with us seeing ourselves, and that starts with sharing. So when we are brave enough to share first, open our hearts and be honest, people are like, oh, first of all, wow, I didn't know that about Olga. Okay. And then second of all, oh, I'm thinking about something like that in my life too. Wow, that's so much reflection. Okay. And then thirdly, wow, she had that experience. I had experience. Wow, we are the same. We are connected. I'm not weird. I'm not like fucked up for being that way because someone else is feeling that. And then often why I did it in a group last time, everyone in the group would have a similar experience. And then it would be like, whoa, mind blown. Like, we're all strangers. Why do we all have this? And then we realize, oh, it's just a human experience. Like you said, we're just all human, right? We're all going through it. So this has happened so many times, like literally thousands of times over the 7 years, that it's such a core belief of mine. It's like, obviously you would share because then all of this great stuff happens. And everyone, I mean, obviously at the end, just like so connected, right? So we use it for team building, we use it for bonding. I've used it to build the closest relationships in my life, which is what basically support me through this time of grief and my relationship ending. So it's like, I don't know what else to say. It's like, yeah. And of course, it's so hard. I know it's so hard. That's why we made the tool, the empathy box, to help people, basically, if you don't know how to hold space, the tool teaches you how to hold space so you can do it together, right? So you're all doing it together. No one has to be the facilitator. There's still that thing that you do together, right? So yeah, it's like, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for like how to get over that risk? Or, there
Risk
is a
aversion,
risk, obviously.
100%, 100%. Wow. Is it cliche to just say, just start? Like, oh, actually, find a friend. Yeah. For me, that's so helpful. Like, if I tell you, okay, Olga, organize a dinner party so you can all do it together. By the way, the whole thing started with dinner parties with strangers.
Mm.
So I would literally get strangers together for a dinner party, and then we would do the game, right? But anyway, yeah, get a friend. Just one friend. Just one, right? Just one that has the same values as you. And I'm sure you have at least one, like whoever's listening, you have at least one, and tell them about this dream of yours, this idea, and do it together. Oh, that's so helpful for me. Like every time I feel stuck in something, I just call my best friend, whatever it is. She's always down for anything. She's crazy, right? So it's like, so I'm always like, oh, okay, like, yeah, it's so much easier to do it together, literally. So it doesn't need to be a whole group. You could just call one person and be like, okay, I want to do this thing. And honestly, even if you do the empathy box with just one person, it's still so much more powerful because then you would have that bond with that one person. And then you would both be like, you know what, this is great. Let's do it with more people. And then it grows, right? So like you said, the small steps, right? Like just start, like just one person, maybe another person and another person. And that's how everything grows, right? Like that's how it spreads. Yeah, but just start with one person. The person you already feel comfortable with, right? Like again, just like when you charge the amount that you feel comfortable with. You're not doing the 100, like yeah. So
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think also what's, ringing for me too is knowing why you're doing, and you have such a
sure.
big why for that. That's like fundamental. And so, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And kind of like as we're wrapping up, I'm curious now that, well, I guess like your last company was really, about mindfulness and kind of like probably redefining success. But how do you define success? How has it evolved over time? And especially as you're like continuing on this path of holding space for people?
I'm going to be very honest to say that I think I'm still defining what success looks like for me now. Because I think if I were to look back at my journey, when I first started going into astrology, when I said the flow was so strong, I felt like I was just in like this like raging river, and I just like flowed all the way to completion. The river is still flowing, but it's not like like the force isn't as strong. And I think it's because my attention has splintered from this one thing to other things, right? Like my friends, my dancing, my own life now, as I'm learning to rebuild my life as a single woman, right? So like all these things, like the attention is splintered basically, right? And in the past, I used to be able to enjoy that all-in focus on the one thing. And like, again, being so dead set, like, the universe is crazy that way. When you're so dead set on the one thing, it's gonna just flow, right? But when you start to, like a bit, then universe like, oh, okay, she's not as like, oh, so universe also like, all right, she's chilling, I'm chilling also, kind of thing. I do that, right? So I think right now, especially as Saturn is starting to station direct, and he's been on my sun for like, I don't know, like I think the past, right? It's fucking crazy. So it's like as he moves away, I really have been going through that process of like redefining my relationship with this business and my career and all of that. And I know the way that I used to relate in the past, both to my previous company and also to this company to some extent, was very focused on like, like being all in, basically, right? I'm not saying that you can't be all in on your business. I'm not sure if that is still my definition of success, because it definitely used to be. I thought that if I was like consummately passionate about this one thing, then I am successful because I am living in purpose, right? I'm like, oh, every day I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. Right now, my purpose is a little bit splintered. I don't really have that one driving force to get me through the day. So I feel a bit like, okay, I'm not really sure. But again, that's where the trust comes in, because somehow, again, a part of me is telling me it will come, clarity will come, either in the form of, a new purpose or maybe a redefined purpose, or like a amalgamation of everything that you care about now. Like maybe that will be your new purpose. I don't know. But I'm just going with the flow, right? Like I'm not like, okay, I'm not like stopping my entire life and just waiting for it to drop on my lap. I'm still saying yes to things. I'm still moving forward. And things are starting to flow again, thank God. But it's like, you know, like in terms of like, oh, having that one thing, I've given up that control of trying to know what that is. And I realized that's what tripped me up so many times in the previous company. Right now, as I'm talking to you with the hindsight of like how I think the 3 years since I stopped doing it, I'm able to talk about it so passionately, like, yeah, of course, we should all share and be vulnerable, whatever. But when I was in it, I was like, whoa, what is that one vision we have for the world? And I was so caught up in it, so caught up in like trying to define the success of the company, that I lost sight of my relationship to it, right? And my passion to it. And that's why eventually I left and I did astrology and all the things. But now looking back, I'm like, wow, that's a great company, right? Like that's a great vision. That's like what we did, even though it was so fundamental to me at that point. Now looking back, it's so powerful and it's still so needed, right? Even talking to you now. So I was like, wow, if only I had trusted more and given it that space to breathe while still moving forward. So I think what I've learned is to keep moving forward. I know it sounds so dumb, but it's like, just keep going, right? Like, and not keep going in like the hustle sense, but like, when things are dark, you're not really sure if you're on the right path. If you just keep taking steps forward, like even the tiniest steps, eventually you will arrive at some form of clarity. I really believe that. And sometimes that clarity could come in the form of a new path, right? Like, oh, I'm not supposed to be on this path anymore, so another path. Okay, but it's still moving forward, But if you just stop in that middle of the road and you're like, oh, which one is it? Like partner, no partner, whatever, right? If you stop, then that's what basically debilitates you, right? And then that's why you wake up, I don't know, like 10, like 50 years later, and you're like, oh, what happened with my life? Like, right? I really believe, yeah, it really just starts with, yeah, just keep moving forward. Just keep moving forward.
It really goes back to how you were talking about like sharing your story as you're living it without needing to have this like definitive like lesson that I'm going to share. It's almost like the same thing here, right? Like you don't need to have an answer. Like you don't need to know what the next big thing is, as long as you're floating with the transits.
Yeah, flowing forward. I think that's the right word. Forward. I think that's the key for me. Forward.
I love that. Is there, let me just look at my list of questions. Is there anything else that you would love to share that comes to mind, or like any other words of wisdom for people on the path of spiritual careers?
I think it's like the last thing I'll say is just commit. Just find the smallest possible thing you can commit to and just keep seeing it through, right? Even if, using the example of the money, right? Like I can commit to $55 for reading. Okay, I commit, right? I can commit to, at that time for me, showing up on Instagram, making a reel, every week. Okay, I commit. Whatever you feel you can commit to, and that's a key word here, can, right? Like, your own capacity, like it has to feel exciting to commit to it, right? Whatever you can commit to, just commit and just keep seeing it through, right? Just keep going. Just keep going. It may not make sense in the bigger picture of things, but I feel like the thing is when you stop, when you try to like, like it's like the river is flowing, but you try to build a dam. That's when you disrupt the flow of yourself and also the universe, right? I'm so glad, despite all the craziness in my life, as you know, I never stopped writing Substack, for example. I'm so glad I never stopped giving readings or whatever, right? Like I trusted that, oh, I didn't need to like close my books and announce to everyone, hey guys, my books are closed because I'm grieving. Like I never did that, because I knew that when I was ready and when universe deemed me ready, things would flow again. And it's true. Literally on the day of like this whole breakup happening, I got an inquiry for like probably the biggest corporate gig of my entire life, even bigger than in my previous company because this is all mine, right? And I was like, oh, that's weird. Okay, right? But I saw it through. I trusted that I would be in the right emotional place to deal with it as things went along, and it did. And again, I also trust that if this is meant for me, universe, like if I meant to do this, it would happen. And sure enough, it's happening next week, right? And I'm like so nervous. I'm so like, I don't know if I can do it. But I just keep reminding myself, okay, if it's happening, it means you can do it. So that's the trust, right? It's not just trust in yourself, but it's also trust like, hey, if the universe is giving you this opportunity, it means that, you can do it. Don't sabotage yourself to say like, oh, why is this happening? Am I ready? Like, oh, should I close my books? Should I? Oh, what if someone books me during this time? Like, trust. Like it will only happen at the time that it's meant to happen for you. And if it's happening, it means that you're meant to, let's say, give that reading at that time. And you're meant to be busy at that time, let's say, right? It's meant to overwhelm you at that time. Why? I don't know, right? Just follow through and you'll find out. Yeah, just follow through and you'll find out. So, yeah.
I love that. Cool. Are there, and this is, you can think about it and email me, but I also wanted to ask you for like 3 most influential pieces of content you've ever consumed. Like it could be a book, an article, a quote or song, just anything that like really impacted your path. I would love to include, but
I'll try to think about that.
Yeah. No pressure. And then was there anything like you wanted me to include to promote that you're doing, or like anything specific?
I think right now, in terms of what people can consume off the get-go, it would be obviously, paid subscriptions to my Substack, right? Where you enjoy this, I share about, everything we talked about here very vulnerably on a consistent basis on Substack. Readings for sure. I think right now I have 2 main readings. One is initiation, which is basically, an introduction to your natal chart from this lens of, again, what I've been sharing, right? Like through this lens of being able to look at the full picture. So not like, oh, like what co-star says, like, oh, Mercury in Aquarius, what that means, Sun in Pisces, what that means. But like looking at how all of it comes together, and then basically knowing the story of your stars, right? And the story of your life, your karma, your dharma, and how it all ties together, and how you can basically live best in service of your own purpose and path, right? I love doing readings like that. And also I'm starting to offer forecast readings because we're coming to the end of the year. So the year ahead, right?
Cool.
These are, my most popular readings. Like last year, again, universe, right? It's like someone out of the blue, hey, do you offer this? And I was so insecure about my skills as an astrologer at that time. I was like, oh, okay. I always just say yes first and then I figure it out. And this wonderful woman has been messaging me throughout the year. Every time something comes true, she's like, you're so on point. I love you. And I'm like, thank you, universe. Oh, I'm so glad I chose to do it, right? So I'm like, okay, again, someone asked me this year. So I was like, oh, I guess I meant to do it again. Okay, it's so crazy. It's so crazy how these things work. So I always just wait for the guidance. So yeah, I'm going to be offering that as well. Yeah, and I'm also starting to offer like long-term coaching. So like I noticed like one-off readings. I used to be happy with that, but now I'm like, oh, people are starting to ask for, more and more readings like in a structured way. So I was like, interesting. Okay. So yeah, I'm starting to like ease my way into that. So
Yeah, I've noticed there are like a couple of clients too that just keep coming back to me for like, oh, can we like focus on this area of life and other area of life? And I'm like, why don't all astrologers actually do that?
Yeah, because
So
I think owning the identity of coach is very scary also.
Yeah.
Because again, you are answerable to this person's growth, right? So if you are not, taking care of your own growth, again, there's going to be that, the discrepancy of like, can I hold someone else's growth if I don't feel like I can, so the whole thing. But yes, I feel like, you can do it, I can do it, we can all do it, right? And we are just on this path together. So yeah.
Oh, yay. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for finding the time and doing this. And thank you for everything you do. And I'm so excited to keep seeing what you write and
seeing
what that goes. Sweet.
Okay.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, you too. Okay. Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.